of South Florida. The exhibition is titled Marking Monuments and is curated by Sarah Howard. Sarah is curator of public art and social practice. Based on the registration for this panel today, we have a large audience of over 200 viewers. So I'm going to give you a very brief introduction as to who we are. I have the privilege of directing the Institute for Research in Art. The Institute includes the Contemporary Art Museum, Graphic Studio, and Public Art. The Institute is part of the College of the Arts with Chris Garvin as Dean. The faculty and staff of the Institute work together to engage emerging and leading artists of our time who are addressing compelling and relevant ideas, and particularly themes of social justice. Artists are curated into temporary exhibitions, work as artists in residence at Graphic Studio to produce new work as print editions or sculpture multiples, and or may be commissioned for a special project in the museum or in the broader communities that we serve. The pandemic has required the Contemporary Art Museum to innovate new ways to offer our programs. And so Marking Monuments is one of two current exhibitions physically installed in the museum. The sister exhibition opened last night with a panel discussion. It is titled Still Here, the Griffith J. Davis Photographs and Archives in Context. While students and faculty may make appointments to see the physical exhibitions, the exhibitions may also be viewed virtually. The website includes related materials that introduce the artists and curatorial themes and a virtual tour of each exhibition. So please visit ira.usf.edu and learn more about these projects and other programs of the Institute. Up in the chat for this presentation today will be the links, but you can always just Google USF Contemporary Art Museum and find your way to information about our exhibitions and programs. This exhibition, Marking Monuments, that we celebrate the opening of it today, received support from the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts, the Stanton Store Embrace the Arts Foundation, Art for Community Engagement, what we call our ACE Fund, and the Lee and Victor Levengood Endowment. We also received a general program grant from the Florida Department of State Division of Cultural Affairs. The USF Contemporary Art Museum works with a faculty advisory council from across the USF campuses and seeks partnerships to provoke interest and inspire dialogue for our students and in the larger Tampa Bay region. This panel today is the first of a four-part series, Monuments, Markers, and Memory, that focuses on the critical exploration of power, politics, and activism around public monuments and memorials. The Monuments, Markers, and Memory series is made possible through a partnership between the Florida Public Archaeology Network, the John and Mabel Ringling Museum of Art, the USF Department of Anthropology, of course us, the USF Contemporary Art Museum, New College Public Archaeology Lab, and the State College of Florida, Manatee, Sarasota, and is supported by grants from the Florida Humanities and National Endowment for the Humanities and an internal grant from USF Research One. Information on future panels can be found on our website and also on a Facebook page, Monuments, Markers, and Memory. This will be mentioned again during the panel discussion today, and again will appear in the chat box for you to find those links. Both of our current exhibitions, Marking Monuments and Still Here, the Griffith J. Davis Photographs and Archives in Context, have enjoyed the support and collaboration of the USF Department of Anthropology. Dr. Antoinette Jackson, who is a chair and professor, introduced us to Dorothy Davis and the Griffith Davis Archive. And Dr. Diane Wallman, assistant professor in anthropology, has been key to the organization of the series of panels, Monuments, Markers, and Memory. It is now my pleasure to welcome and introduce Dr. Diane Wallman.
Hello, and thank you, Margaret. Welcome to the opening panel for our series, Monuments, Markers, and Memory. Today's panel is entitled Reimagining Monuments, Contemporary Interventions in Public Space. As Margaret just said, I'm Diane Wallman. I'm Assistant Professor of Anthropology here at USF and one of the co-organizers of this symposium series, which is focused on a critical discussion of monuments, memorialization, heritage, racial injustice, historical justice, politics, art, and activism. I just wanted to offer today a few remarks as we open and begin the series. First, I would like to acknowledge that the University of South Florida resides on the traditional homelands and territories of the Seminole, as well as other historic groups, including the Calusa and Tocobaga. Today, the state of Florida is home to the Seminole, Miccosukee, Muskogee, and Choctaw, and to individuals of many other Native groups. We recognize the historical and continuing impacts of colonization on Indigenous communities, their resilience in the face of colonial and state-sponsored violence, and we fully support Indigenous sovereignty. Second, I just want to acknowledge the state of Florida's complicated history with slavery and anti-Black racism. While a Spanish territory, the land that is now Florida was both a site of enslavement and a haven for escaped slaves from the North. Florida, however, under the control of the British and eventually the United States with a slave state. On the eve of the Civil War, enslaved African Americans accounted for 44% of Florida's population. Florida seceded from the Union in 1861, confirming the state's commitment to maintaining the horrific institution of slavery. Even after the end of the Civil War, Reconstruction and Jim Crow in Florida were defined by anti-Black racism and violence. This series and our collective consortium were formed around the idea that we need to actively confront these dark histories and legacies of settler colonialism and slavery. We must try to challenge and dismantle the revisionist and false narratives produced, created, and recreated by white supremacist ideology. Our particular focus here is on colonial and Confederate memorials, monuments, iconography, and symbols. After seeing John Sims, one of the panelists today, and showing his work in the exhibit, wrote an op-ed on the Judah P. Benjamin Monument and Confederate Memorial at Gamble Plantation, which is in Ellenton, Florida, in the Tampa Bay Times, I reached out to him. And we began conversations on our shared concerns over the Confederate Memorial at the plantation. From there, grew a consortium of individuals and institutions dedicated to creating a multivocal and transdisciplinary collective to work towards historical justice. Through these panels, we hope to highlight the voices and histories that have been systematically silenced. It was serendipitous that John was an incoming artist in residence at the Ringling Museum, focusing his performance piece in part on Confederate iconography. It was further fortuitous that Sarah Howard and the team at USF Contemporary Art Museum were developing this exhibit marking monuments, which some of today's illustrious panel are showing in. If you haven't had a chance to check out the virtual tour yet, which is what my image is from, I highly recommend you go on the USF Contemporary Art Museum website and take the tour of this powerful exhibition. So through these events, through this series, we hope to begin an honest, insightful, and productive discourse concerning the role of art, activism, and academia, and how we might reimagine, respond, recover, and redress who and what our society memorializes, what stories are celebrated, and what stories are silenced and erased through the construction of monuments and markers. So I'd like to once again welcome everybody. I'd like to thank Margaret Miller, Sarah Howard, and their team for organizing this wonderful exhibition and panel. Like Margaret said, check out our Facebook page for the other 3 upcoming events that will be taking place over the next 2 weeks. And please enjoy the inspiring discussion today. Thank you.
Greetings. I don't know if I can be seen. Let's see. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
See me? Okay. Greetings and thank you for joining us this morning. Thank you to Margaret Miller and Dr. Diane Wallman for their remarks and introduction to this first event in the Monuments, Markers, and Memory Symposium series, and the opening occasion for marking monuments. I would like to echo Margaret's recognition to Dr. Wallman and the USF Department of Archaeology and Florida Public Archaeology Network for their partnership on this interdisciplinary symposium, and express gratitude to the members of CAM's team who conjure all the magic behind the scenes to facilitate our exhibitions and programs. These conversations continue to provide valuable opportunities to connect with our community of artists, advocates, and each of you. And we couldn't do it without critical funding from the USF College of the Arts, grant awards from funders like the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts, and our private donors. And for that, we are thankful. I'd like to express special gratitude to our panelists, Ariel Renee Jackson, Jory Minaya, Karen Olivier, John Sims, and Patricia Kim from Monument Lab for participating in today's discussion. We are convening virtually from Florida, the Dominican Republic, Pennsylvania, New York, Texas, and beyond. And I'm thrilled and honored to be in conversation with such a brilliant group of artists and educators with deep experience working across the platforms of art, activism, and public culture. Marking Monuments was conceived over this past summer as public monuments to colonizers, slave traders, white supremacists were defaced, toppled, and ousted from their elevated plinths as they became targets and central sites of protest against police brutality and systemic racism in the wake of the horrific murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and too many others. Engaging with the global dialogues confronting and dismantling colonialists and anti-Black monuments, markers, and memorials in public space, the exhibition presents a selection of artists' installations and interventions that challenge, erase, and transform dominant histories, offering reimagined representations for equity in public culture. Asserting the power and the potential of art and the vital role of the artist to challenge and reframe critical social issues, these projects respond to the historical context of existing monuments, their site and community to shed light on questions of commemoration, visibility, permanence, and inclusion and representation. Who is responsible for inscribing public space? Who is being honored and how? And how do monuments and memorials generate knowledge and memory of our past, present, and future? For those who haven't had an opportunity to view the Marking Monuments exhibition, I encourage you to visit the USF CAM website and explore the online exhibition platforms, including a navigable model of the gallery where you can view images and videos of the artists' projects and engage with Monument Lab's field trip hands-on activity guide to examine and envision monuments for your community. Today, our program will start with brief presentations from each of our panelists. Then we will engage in a moderated conversation before taking questions from the audience. I would like to invite our viewers to add any questions you might have into the Q&A window on Zoom or comment section on Facebook Live, and we'll be happy to get to those towards the end of the conversation. The panelists' bios with links to their websites and organizations will be posted in the chat for reference. In addition, live transcription is available for viewers using the Zoom platform. And I'd like to invite Ariel Renee Jackson to turn on her camera. Ariel Renee Jackson works across film, sculpture, and performance, exploring land and landscape as sites of internal representation. Jackson's work is centered in investigations of ancestral memory and knowledge and informed by their research on economic and social systems of segregation, cultivating intergenerational dialogues around themes of loss, transformation, and growth.
Thank you for that introduction, Sarah. And thank you for including me in this exhibition, as well as thank you to the faculty and staff of the University of South Florida Contemporary Art Museum. I'm excited to be in conversation with all of the artists here whose work I'm very thankful for. My name is Ariel Renee Jackson. I'm a Louisiana native, and I'm a multidisciplinary artist. My practice, as stated before, explores concepts of belonging and how culture is learned by way of repurposing objects. I respectfully acknowledge the Tonkawa and Humanos people who have stewarded the land currently occupied by myself and other residents of Austin, Texas, throughout the generations, and the Comanche and Apache people who have moved through this area. So behind me is a still of the video that's included in the exhibition entitled Bentonville Forecast in the Square. I created this video in 2019. I was interested in the relationship between narrative and meaning and the construction of identity as it relates to land-specific sites, in this case, a Confederate monument in Bentonville, Arkansas, which is the same location that the Crystal Bridges Museum and the Momentary is based. So I spent some time in Bentonville as part of a residency at the Momentary, and there I was curious about relationship between community and site. And the film that I made during there became a foundation in developing a language around weather as a metaphor for how marginalized groups utilize oral archives as a method of measuring the temperature of a space used based on sites and historical timelines. So here you can see there's this black balloon. It's a weather balloon. And my interest in weather balloons goes back to my previous work where I was very interested in circular shapes as they related to the African diaspora. And I really wanted to play around with what kind of physical objects I could create. And when I came upon the weather balloon, during my time at Skowhegan, I really sort of thought more deeply about what that object is. And so weather balloons are used to carry instruments that send back information on atmospheric pressure, temperature, humidity, and wind speed. Meteorologists can use this information to make forecasts and predict storms. As it rises into space, it expands until it explodes and falls back to Earth. So in front of a camera, I attempted to hide the statue with a weather balloon, slowly raising it up. And I like to think through the weather balloon about how individual testimonies collect like layers of soil, letters of survival to make forecasts and predict unwelcomeness in landscapes, identifying physical markers such as this and what they exemplify. So in 2019, I arrived interested, thinking about Arkansas's winding terrain, my own familial ties. I have cousins and family in Arkansas, as well as Arkansas's recent history of being the home of the Ku Klux Klan. Previously, the KKK was based in northern Louisiana, where I was born. Over the course of 6 weeks, I developed a close relationship with generations of Black and Brown women in the area, and I confided in them my experiences of being stereotyped by neighbors in the neighborhood I lived in. I could go into that, but don't really have the time right now. What I do want to do is make sure that I acknowledge all 4 participants in this project. First is Sharon Killian, an Arkansas-based artist and president of the Fayetteville Art Alliance and president of the Northwest Arkansas African American Heritage Association. There's also Rachel Lynette, who is a playwright and theater artist who was at the time working as my liaison to show me around Bentonville. Cherie Miller, who is a longtime community volunteer, activist, and church member. She's a badass. She chained herself to the bench right outside of this Confederate, and I believe she and her community are the reason why that statue is no longer there. They moved it to another location, and Cherie Miller is an amazing person. And then Tanya Jackson, who is an art exhibition travel assistant for Crystal Bridges Museum's curatorial department. These women verified my experience with their own historical and personal accounts of racism in the region. Through interviews as opposed to written history, I learned about the impact of a Confederate monument in the town square. As you all know, Confederate monuments were built all across the United States during the era of segregation and continue to serve as an offensive reminder of America's history of slavery and racial oppression, functioning as a covert placeholder for who the town is intended for. I'm currently working towards a solo exhibition entitled A Welcoming Place that will be based here in Austin. And so this work is a step towards that, which in this work here, I stitched together my conversation with Sharon, Rachel, Cherie, and Tanya's oral narratives into what felt like a love letter, a letter of warning, a forecast. And I performed a choreographed walk around the statue while holding a weather balloon, hiding the statue from view at times through video, which is, in my mind, the tool that I use to forecast in a similar way as someone on the news who is delivering the information that they got by working with other meteorologists to determine what storms are coming. And I felt like this hiding was a nod to the elusive nature of racist meanings within this landscape in particular. But my intention is to hopefully travel to other locations and sort of kind of like the garden gnome that people would like, oh, he's here, he's here, he's here. Something like that is my intention, and sort of developing, and not sort of, but developing an archive of information to really more accurately, I feel, describe what a place is at the moment. As a native New Orleanian, Louisiana native, I feel strongly about listening to community in addition to written information and facts. I experienced Hurricane Katrina. A lot of conversations were being had before the hurricane happened. And it felt, looking back at the before and aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, it felt like the community really had to look out for themselves. When my community was suggesting that there was a bomb at the levee, and that was dismissed by academics because they said it wasn't factual, it made me question what truth is in terms of experience. Do we trust the people who have had the experience over, what academics or scientists have developed after the experience has occurred? So that's all for me, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you, Ariel. That's great. Next, I'll invite Joy Minaya to turn on her camera. Joy Minaya is a US-born, Dominican-raised, multidisciplinary artist living and working in New York City. Her practice confronts historic and contemporary representations of Black and Brown womanhood, tropical identity, and the gaze in order to decolonize and subvert imposed histories and hierarchical representations of culture.
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for having me here, for giving me the opportunity to speak in further about my work, and for including me in the show, which looks really fantastic on the 360. It's really great to have a chance to see it remotely. So I'll jump right in. I'm gonna be talking about my series, The Cloaking, which has taken place in one form or another now in 3 or maybe actually 4 locations. And the one that you're seeing here is in Florida, but I'll get to that one later in my presentation. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. So the image that you're seeing is a Photoshop montage of a statue that sits in front of the governor's house in Nassau in the Bahamas, of Christopher Columbus. And I was invited to the Bahamas in 2017 by the National Art Gallery in the Bahamas that was led at the time by Amanda Colson, and Holly Bino was curator there at the time. And they had a program called Double Dutch where they invite wider diaspora, Caribbean diaspora artists to be paired with a local Bahamian artist. So I had a 2-person show with Dee Brown. And in the context of that show, the show was gonna open on October 12th. It ended up opening on the 13th, but going there around that date and being the Bahamas, the country that currently has San Salvador Island as part of it, which is the first island that supposedly, according to the chronicles, the Spanish first saw when they first saw land in the continent. Its native name is Guanani, and they called it San Salvador. And I wanted to acknowledge this history with the coincidence that I was going to be there around the time, and that I had been recently at the time editing a video that talk about the tourist industry and in relation to this colonial history as well. So it felt fitting, and I was also at the time working with tropical patterns. So the thinking about tropical patterns, how they're a signifier for this superficial way that we relate to the tropics, that is derivative of also colonial history, that is linked to like natural resources and a bunch of things that I might not have a lot of time to get into. But I wanted to cover the statue with a hypertropical pattern to highlight this intersection of tourism and colonial history. Because these statues in the Caribbean are also a touristic site. They're in like tour guides, in books and pamphlets. It's a place to visit when you go to these places. So I proposed to do this, and the monuments division of, I can't remember what museum, didn't give me the permission, and they said that the Bahamas wasn't ready to have that conversation. And I felt that what they meant was this is like in the context of like after Rhodes Must Fall in 2015, and there was conversation about certain statues in different places that I think, I'm pretty sure that's what they meant. So what I did instead, we can go to the next slide, was printing the image, the Photoshop montage of what my installation would have looked like, and you can go to the next slide, and printed them as postcards and invited the audience to come into the gallery space and write down their opinions on my proposal. And it was an interesting way to capture about 80 or, yeah, I think 80 different opinions of people who participated. And they're kind of all over the place. Some of them say things like history is what it is and you can't mess with it and you shouldn't try to change it. Some people are very passionately saying that the statue shouldn't be there and why is it there. Some other people were doing like more artistic interpretation. So it was an interesting mix of opinions. We can go to the next slide. And then in 2019 in Miami, I had the chance to actually wrap some statues thanks to Fringe Projects Miami, which is Deborah Lehman, DiCapua, and Justin Long, who do temporary public art installations with different contemporary artists. So I was invited to do that, and we found the statues and proceeded with asking for permits. And it was kind of an anxious process because we weren't sure if we were going to have the permit, but ultimately we got it. And for the occasion of getting this permit, instead of what I wanted to do in the Bahamas was using the same hypertropical patterns that I had been using in previous works, which were patterns that I appropriated that are already printed and commercially available and that you can buy. But for this occasion, after getting the permit, I reconsidered that, and instead I did research on kind of addressing some of my issues with these patterns, because they're kind of used regardless of location in the tropics to advertise different touristic destinations. But the flora represented in the pattern doesn't have much to do with the location necessarily. So I wanted to address that. So I did some research and try to find plants that highlighted some sort of stories of resistance to this colonial history. And I found quite interesting plants. I think you can go to the next slide. Oh, you can go to the next slide again. These are some of the images that are in the show right now. This one too. This is Ponce de Leon. The previous one was Christopher Columbus. So we identified those two statues. And you can go to the next slide. And that should be, the next slide should be, yes, a close-up of one of the patterns. So Ponce de Leon, I found, was struck by an arrow that was poisoned with manchineel, which is the plant that you're seeing now, the main plant. There's another plant in that pattern called kunti or samia. But the main plant is manchineel, which is a very toxic plant. I think it holds the record of like the Guinness record of the most toxic plant in the world. That the Calusa natives of South Florida used to poison their arrows, and they used it against the Spanish invaders in the 1500s, 1520s, I think. And so I was really excited when I found this fact to use this plant and use this kind of like botanical depiction, like very realistic type of depiction of the plant, which is also like, if you think about botanical illustrations, they're also this colonial tool to assess newfound resources at the time. And the knowledge of those plants helped in the exploitation that happened in the Americas. So I was interested in using that language to cover this monument and cover the monument with something that was used by the people native to the place to defend themselves or resist the colonial process. And then you can go to the next slide, which features, which is showing a detail of the pattern that I designed to cover the statue of Christopher Columbus behind the amphitheater that is near Bayfront Park. And this pattern features a plant that we call in Spanish in the Dominican Republic higuereta, but in English it's castor plant. And castor was a plant that was brought to the Americas through the transatlantic slave trade, not directly by the enslaved people because they couldn't carry anything, but it was brought from Africa to the Americas. But the knowledge of how to deal with the plant was brought by it's like medically, chemically, but also it's related to ideas of healing in the sense of like spiritual healing and cleansing, getting rid of bad energies and all of that. So I thought it was especially fitting for covering a statue like Christopher Columbus' statue. And also it's a plant that also has a really potent toxin called ricin, which actually someone sent some ricin to, I think, the White House during Trump's presidency, which is luckily done. I thought it was interesting that knowledge of how to use how to distill or like how to separate the very toxic element from the healing element came through these people. So it also features Yapon holly, which is a plant that was used by different native peoples in the south of Florida and I think Georgia as well. And rompesaragüey, which is a plant that is used still nowadays in Yoruba-derived traditions in the Caribbean, especially in Cuba, for again cleansing and healing. Can you hear me? Well, it's a little windy here. Let me know if I should do something to address that. Maybe I can do this. And can we go to the next slide? I'll finally speak about my most recent project. Oh, this is another view of the Miami project. We can go to the next slide. Oh, actually, yes. Yeah, so this is the fourth. This was never like an actual proposal that I proposed somewhere, but I was invited to do a show called Fanfare that was presented just like a few blocks away from Columbus Circle. And I wanted to, of course, I'd love to cover this monument, but I haven't done the proper research to find the plants that were more fitting for having this conversation in New York City. So I adapted a previous design just to get an image, because I think there's something really powerful about imagining this cover monuments, even if they don't actually get to be covered. So the show was like in location wise very near where the statue is, so I thought it was fitting to have this conversation. We can go to the next slide. And this was another one that worked like the first proposal in the Bahamas, where I didn't get to cover a monument, but we can go to the next slide. But I got to print postcards and invite the students of Fordham University, which has the part of their campus here, to have this conversation in relation to this site that is near their school. We can go to the next slide to get to the final project that I was talking about previously. So this is do this, and I don't know if I'll have a lot of I don't think I'll have time to talk about each of these plants, but they're very meaningful to me because I grew up with a lot of them surrounding me here, and it's been really interesting to learn about the different uses and different applications that people have used this for. Sorry, it's a little loud here. You can go to the next slide. So I designed this pattern to wrap the statue of Christopher Columbus in a very important plaza in the colonial zone in Santo Domingo, which is like, it has all of these very old monuments, including like the first everything of America, the first cathedral, the first whatever. And it's all, of course, built by enslaved, the labor of the enslaved and the labor of the indigenous people who perished in this process. There's different theories, but up until recently, it was widely accepted that the Taino people, which is a very generic name for different groups of people that inhabited the Caribbean before colonization, that the Taino people perished during the first around 100 years of the colony, and that's why slavery began or became stronger, because it was originally to replace a population that was massacred basically. And but anyways, this is an interesting iteration because I did the proposal. I was working with an institution here, Centro Leon, and the proposal is actually will be shown in their biennial, which opens next week. But we never got the permit. However, I got the support from one politician named Mario Sosa, who is a local regidor. I don't really know how to translate this. Yeah, I don't know how to say regidor in English, but and he said, well, we didn't get the permit, but let's do it. So he supported me in doing this basically illegally. So that's us installing, and you can go to the next slide. And finally, that's what it looked like. It's very different from my previous installations because I usually sew a bodysuit that is very fitting to the statue in order to also subvert those kind of visual signifiers of this monument, because they're very intentional, right? So I'm also trying to be intentional in what I'm doing to the image of the monument. But in this case, because it was without a permit, it was basically a giant blanket that we like wrapped around the monument. And this has also been interesting because in the last like 5 days, this was last Monday, in the last 4 or 5 days, it's been very interesting to read like all sorts of news and like social media accounts for very visible platforms discussing this and seeing the comments. It's been both hopeful and kind of like scary to read the things that people say, but it's been very interesting to read the conversation and have people have dialogue about this. This statue is particularly insulting because it has, I don't know if you can see it, but Maybe you can zoom in, but there's a statue underneath Christopher Columbus, which is high up there. Underneath Christopher Columbus, this is by the Spanish because she wouldn't collaborate. She did initially, and then she saw what was happening, and then she stopped collaborating and was murdered. So it's like particularly intense that she is underneath Christopher Columbus, writing his name and saying something like enlighten Baron, I don't know what, like singing praises basically to this figure. So that was also part of the conversation that we wanted to have. And it's interesting that a lot of the comments of people revealed that they didn't even know that that was Ana Caona underneath Colon. So it's interesting. Okay, I think I'll stop here. I probably went over a little. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jory. Thank you for that. All right, and next we've got Karen Olivier. Karen Olivier is a Philadelphia-based artist and educator who creates public art, sculpture, and installations that expose social, political, and economic contradictions and the residue of slavery in contemporary culture. Olivier's work often explores public versus private space, revealing opportunities for expanded approaches to accessibility and inclusivity.
Okay, I'm glad to be here. Okay, I'm going to go quickly. Okay, in 2017, Monument Lab charged 20 artists in Philadelphia with a question, what is an appropriate monument for the city of Philadelphia? And I was intrigued by two monuments in Vernon Park, a historic park in my neighborhood. So this monument is dedicated to Francis Daniel Pistorius. He was an early German settler in the neighborhood, and he led the first Quaker protest against slavery in 1688. It's almost 200 years before it was abolished. I found out that during World War I and II, this monument was boxed over. It was felt that the language and the look of the monument was contradictory to how America's image was, and it was too dramatic. The other monument I was interested in is centrally located in the park. This is the Battle of Germantown Memorial, and it commemorates an American Revolutionary War battle, of course, led by George Washington. I was interested in the fact that it honors a failed battle, which is, of course, speaks about power, privilege, and access. Who gets to have a monument? Who's deemed worthy? I was interested in Francis Daniel Pistorius, who was fighting for the freedom of Blacks, of slaves in this country, but wasn't considered kind of American enough to continually honor, and Washington, who was fighting for America's liberation from British rule while owning slaves. So I was thinking about the paradox and the complexity and the complications of the disparate histories that make up America. And I wanted to kind of use that as in my intervention. So I decided to shroud the Battle of Germantown Memorial in a mirrored surface. In effect, I was boxing it up the way the Pistorius monument was in years past. I hope the physical concealment with this reflective surface would allow the monument to feel expansive and accessible, and maybe less intimidating than the colossal nature, and maybe the material weightiness usually allows. I was also thinking about shifting the power dynamics and perhaps allowing for greater agency or a different kind of empathy to take hold. What would it mean to recognize that in your reflection, you become the monument, you become the keeper and protector of democracy? Perhaps you recognize your role in this ever-expanding American narrative, this American experiment. I was interested too in invisibility. Depending on your location in the park, the monument would appear to disappear. And of course, I wanted this to be in conversation with Confederate monuments and the debate that's kind of alive and well. And when I think about invisibility, there's a lot I think about that, but we don't have time for that. But I was thinking about, I'm interested in like the fragmentary nature in which we learn about the past and kind of the impossibility of an objective history. You know, it's a neighborhood park, and you know, I live a few blocks away, and I was thinking about this. Kind of imposing monolith, kind of this impenetrable sculpture, and I was thinking how maybe most park goers, perhaps the physical maybe the physical, they feel a kind of a physical and metaphoric distance from it. And maybe it's related to, they think that the monument has no meaning in their lives, or perhaps it's the fact that they pass by hundreds of times. So maybe when you see something over and over, you don't see it again. So what would it mean now to have the familiar become strange, to become uncanny? I was thinking about, I guess I was thinking about, oh, I feel like I have to make this a little shorter. There's this great quote from Robert Musil, who said, "There's nothing in this world as invisible as a monument. They are no doubt erected to be seen, indeed to attract attention. But at the same time, they are impregnated with something that repels attention, like a drop of water on oilskin. Attention runs down them without stopping for a moment." And when I think about that, I think about that, but also maybe the inevitable invisibility is intentional. You know, the monument starts to feel like a natural part of the landscape, which is could be status quo and innocuous on one level, but also it could be an implicit or explicit sign of repression at worst. So I was hoping this monument could address these issues. You know, so I'm thinking like how to give people this different perspective where they're not just focused on the why perspective, that they can kind of see the world before, behind, and around them. What would it mean to kind of make a monument feel porous? You know, I keep thinking that monuments should give witness, they should bear witness, they should be sites of gathering. How do we fortify them? And I think we're the ones who fortify them. I'm going to play this wonderful poet, Trapita Mason. This is an exhibition. Wrote a poem inspired by this piece. I'm going to leave with that.
Monuments to brown boys. The artist installed a mirror over the monument, and the people have come to gawk. Rubberneckers wonder what was there before, and you have come too, laying in the cut, statue still for seconds. Your reflection edging off a 20-foot-high bronze looking glass. You are an alluring hunk of stone beguiling me. Yes, you, brown boy, rough-cut monolith. I see you. You are a low-slung jean-wearing grandmother greeting pillar, an obelisk marking the entrance of your hood. You need to be somebody's memorial, not only when you laid out and lowered in the dirt, your pillow a marble headrest of past tense. He was, he once, he lived. No, you are now and present, alive and in color, and you need to be somebody's walking shrine, somebody's testament, somebody's tribute in this city. You have to be carved, stretched, and erect, a column to buttress boogeymen, the phantoms they say you imagine, the specters and goblins who told bullets and policies and laws that encase you. You need to be somebody's memento. Look how you beaming off that seeing glass. I'm catching your shine. Look at that swagger you carrying, hoodie wearing, fresh fade having, full teeth grinning. You need to be somebody's something to fight for, somebody's celebration, somebody's stone-turned monument, carved and smooth, our masterpiece in this city.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. And hopefully we'll be able to delve further into some of those ideas that you wanted to speak about. And thanks for sharing Trapita Mason's poem as well. And next we have John Sims. John Sims is a Detroit native and Sarasota-based artist, writer, and social justice activist whose interdisciplinary creative practice expands to installation, text, film, music, and performance projects. For the past 2 decades, Sims has been actively challenging white supremacy and confronting Confederate iconography and commemoration through long-term multimedia projects, annual public performances, and political op-eds. John?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Want to thank you all for this opportunity to share my work and be a part of this panel. And I'd like to give a little small presentation here. Just want to make sure you guys see it. Let's see, I think it's right I'm gonna make sure I get the right one. Okay. Can you guys see me? Let's see the presentation.
We can see it.
Okay. And what about that? Can you see recoloration proclamation?
Yes.
Okay. Well, first of all, again, I want to thank everybody for what's going on with this symposium and the 4 parts. And I want to thank USF CAM and thank Diane and all the other organizers for this. What I'd like to do is give a real quick kind of overview of the kind of dynamics that's led to my recent work and also the work with the Gamble Plantation. All of this kind of sits in, kind of centered in around this project that I've been working on for 20 years called Recoloration Proclamation that actually started here in Florida. So let's get right into it. Recoloration Proclamation. So basically, I come down to Florida and I'm from Detroit, go to graduate school in Connecticut. I come down to teach at Ringling College of Art and Design. And I'm just amazed to see the incredible, rich landscape of Confederate iconography, from flags, bumper stickers, and so forth. So I ended up responding to these flags by doing kind of a recolored version, first as a bumper sticker, then as a real flag. And here what you find is I ended up taking that flag to a Klan rally in St. Pete. So now it moved from just an object remix type thing to an article of activism. But before I took it up there, actually, I'd taken a flag up to for a group show up in Harlem. Then it also ended up in a group show, in Soho, and then went to a show, the very first Recoloration Proclamation show in 2002, I believe, in Harlem. And so then sometime in 2004, I got invited to bring the recolored flags to Gettysburg. And as you know, Gettysburg is a very important part of American history, a part of American war history, with the big battlefield there and the number of people that died. So I had the opportunity to present my recolored Confederate flag project. And up until that point, the flag work had been kind of, how should I say, maybe confusing, because seeing the Confederate flag, black, red, and green, you didn't know exactly what that meant. And you didn't know exactly what my political position was. I remember being at the Klan rally in St. Pete, and this black man walks up to me and goes, "Yo, why are you bastardizing the black, red, and green colors of Black nationalism with this Confederate structure, this Confederate flag?" So I hadn't really thought of that. So I ended up creating this piece called "The Proper Way to Hang a Confederate Flag." The idea was to hang it from a 13-foot gallows. And I wanted to introduce that piece in Gettysburg, which I thought was very appropriate. And unfortunately, because of the pushback from the sons and daughters, the Sons of the Confederacy, and other organizations, and the Klan, and the threats and death threats and that sort of thing, I ended up doing a smaller version, a compromise version. I wasn't very, very happy about it, which led to me actually boycotting my own show. After that show, I ended up taking some of this work up to Harlem, where I presented the work at the Bowery Portrait Club and invited poets. Here I began to think about call and response, the work being a call to other artists to respond, to build some sort of kind of energetic dynamics by pushing a movement forward about confronting these issues. So I ended up collaborating with the legendary Karen Finley, also Mary Baraka performed, Bob Holman, and a host of other incredible poets responded to the work. Sometime in 2015, representing and honoring the 150th anniversary of the end of the Civil War, I wanted to do a special project where I would organize Confederate funerals in all of the 13 Confederate states signified with the stars in the Confederate flag. And so I organized these teams from Alabama down to Virginia, all over the American South. And so creating posters, artists, organizing artists, organizing the writers all over the South, and to create this simultaneous Confederate flag funeral on Memorial Day in 2015. Now, before 3 or 4 weeks after that, that's when we had that incredible, terrible, horrific murder, church murder in Charleston at the AME Church. And then because of Dylan's Roof's association with the Confederate flag and it being in South Carolina, it was a renewed attention to Confederate flags and iconography. So on the 4th of July, the next, right after Memorial Day, I organized a statewide Confederate flag burning, call to burn and bury the Confederate flag in all these states. So, and I want to play the video that goes along with that. It's very short.
John Sims Projects presents the Confederate flag burn and bury digital support kit to remember slavery and to honor all of the soldiers of justice who have fought against slavery, Jim Crow segregation, and contemporary white supremacy. There is a call to burn and bury the Confederate flag all across the United States of America every year on Memorial Day. To make your Confederate flag burning and burial a more stimulating and meaningful experience, we are offering absolutely for free a digital support kit. First, you'll get a printable 8.5 by 11 Confederate flag. This is ideal for all of you out there who refuse to buy a Confederate flag or cannot find one because they are all sold out. Also, you get a copy of John Sims' Gettysburg Redress, a rewrite of Lincoln's famous Gettysburg speech. This is a perfect text to read during your burning. What would a Confederate flag barbecue be without music? So we have included a hip-hop Dirty South blues spoken word remix based on John Sims' rejected LA Times op-ed piece, a perfect listening companion to your burning and burying. Then you get a commemorative, printable Afro-Confederate battle flag, so you won't ever forget that Black lives must matter, even in the most insensitive places. And lastly, but not least, for all you creative folks who might get the urge to recolor the damn thing after you have done all that burning and burying, you get a printable outline of the Confederate flag. To download your free digital support kit, go to burnandbury.org.
Right, so I do this every year on Memorial Day, and I've been doing it since 2015. I also like to mention, out of the 13 groups that have organized, some very really great activism has come out of it to take them down. NOLA, those guys that started that were actually part of my group that burned the Confederate flag right there on General Lee Circle, and which actually inspired them to go ahead and turn their attention to Confederate memorials. Also, this is a picture in South Carolina at the state capitol, where I organized a burn and bury, basically the first one, 2015. And you see in the background, there's the Confederate flag right there that's very famous, and it was brought down, I think a week later. So we burned the flag right there at the Capitol, South Carolina. This is a picture in Detroit. We also did a burning. Then in 2017, because I wasn't able to hang the flag the way I wanted to, in Gettysburg, I had the opportunity to do it at Ohio University as an outdoor installation, because that's how it was designed to be in Gettysburg. It was brought in because of issues around safety and security, and all other kind of reasons. And so this is the poster for that event, and this is actual installation shot. This was also coupled with performance, this idea of hanging the flag, bringing it to justice, and creating a performance around that. And shortly after that, I ended up doing a kind of civil reunion performance piece, where the idea was to take a Union and Confederate soldier to work to get married in South in San Francisco at the state capitol. We did a kind of an engagement party that was officiated by the legendary Annie Sprinkle. And this is part of the wedding photos there. I'm also a part of this project. I did the Afro-Dixie listening or CD project where I took the song Dixie and redid it in the key of Black music and all these different various Black musical forms, spiritual, gospel, jazz. This particular work will be showing up in the Dirty South show at the Virginia Museum of Fine Art, curated by the great Valerie Cassell Oliver. This work will be presented in the Confederate Chapel there on the grounds at the museum. I'd like to mention that this work here was took 13 years to do, featuring local musicians and folks right here in the Sarasota area. And this listening parties where I've gone throughout the country and invited poets and writers to respond to various tracks is another way to engage the community and other artists around the work. And that's been pretty much my focus, is stimulating and engaging other artists to create a maximal kind of community engagement. So 2020, basically real quick, you know, in 2020, I did my Burn and Bury project. It was an online event, obviously because of COVID. But if you remember, Memorial Day last year, in 2020, was the same day that George Floyd got murdered, almost right during our performance time, which is really incredible and haunting. After that, I wrote this op-ed piece, the Orlando Sentinel, open letter to the police addressing that. And then that moved, after all the protests around George Floyd's murder, there was an issue that moved from police defunding to white supremacy and articles of white supremacy and looking at memorials and monuments. And so I started looking at the kinds of things right here in Sarasota, which included a marker here dedicated to Judah P. Benjamin, who was the former Secretary of State of the Confederacy and who fled and actually left the US from Sarasota. So I wrote a piece basically identifying this issue and that marker needed to come down. Then I ended up starting this sort of petition to address the Confederate pro laws on the Florida books. One, there's a law, I don't know if you know this, but there's a law that prohibits the desecration of the Confederate flag, plus various celebrations, legal celebrations of Confederate heroes like you know, Jefferson Davis and General Lee and so forth. And also part of this petition, the idea was to confront the Gamble Plantation right here in Ellington, which is very near Sarasota, and to sort of push for renaming and recontextualizing of this plantation. And so there was a number of op-ed pieces that I wrote. And so using the op-ed landscape and page as a way to promote the work, promote the visuals, promote the activism around the work has been proven to be a very, very important way to connect and build community and build activism. This is how I met Diane, by writing these articles, and she's reaching out to me, and therefore now we have this symposium. So out of the work with the Gamble Plantation, going there with, and during this time, I'm also, you know, artist in resident at the Ringling Museum, going to visit that with, as an artist in resident at the Ringling with Elizabeth Dowd, who's the curator of the program that I'm in, and just casing the space and looking and just putting me in this kind of thinking of how I would reimagine this space as a slave memorial, as a place to celebrate and identify the legacy and history and stories of these haunted places and spaces. You know, here we have these slave plantations being used for weddings and photo opportunities and movie sets and that sort of thing. And so this was a way to think about it. So here we have a marker where I kind of recontextualize some of the language, the Black, Red, Green Confederate flag, which is the very first thing, part of my recoloration project. And then over to the left, you'll see a Black obelisk, which have the names. So here we see some of the elements of this reimagined slave memorial. gigantic flag that can fly over the space, written marker, and then this animation, including the obelisk. And the obelisk looks like this. And this is very, with the names of the last slaves that were on that site, on that plantation in 1860. And I think this is something that should happen not only at the Gamble plantation, but at other plantations across the American South. So in my keynote for this symposium, that's what I'm going to be calling for us to be able to, calling for us to look at plantations across the country and what we should do with them and why we should move on them in this particular time. I'd like to end. Now, also a part of my work, this is the ending of the 20-year project, Recoloration Proclamation, but it's also this idea of flying this flag over plantations. This leads us to this newest and last piece of Recoloration Proclamation, which is a 24-foot by 24-foot Afro-Confederate battle flag, which now is hanging at the historical Oslo Theater at the Ringling Museum, which was a part of a performance that I created to deal with some of the main issues of 2020. And that leads us to the last slide here, which is this broadcast 2020 Divisions of America, which includes and features this gigantic Afro Confederate battle flag. And we're going to be doing a broadcast tonight at 7:30. If you're interested in that, reach out. And with that in mind, I want to end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And now we have Patricia Kim. Patricia Kim is, John, do you mind turning off your camera? And
Gotta find my cursor, sorry.
Okay, Patricia Kim is an Associate Director of Public Programs and Editor of the Bulletin and Monument Lab, and Assistant Professor and Faculty Fellow at New York University's Gallatin School of Individualized Study. Monument Lab is public art and art history studio based in Philadelphia. Recently awarded with a major grant from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation to produce an audit of the nation's monuments, Monument Lab works with artists, students, educators, activists, municipal agencies, and cultural institutions on participatory approaches to public engagement and collective memory. Founded by Paul Farber and Ken Lum in 2012, Monument Lab cultivates and facilitates critical conversations around the past, present, and future of monuments.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And thank you to the panelists, artists from whom I've learned so much, and I'm really excited to be in conversation with you. I'm going to go quickly so that we can have some conversation at the end. Sarah introduced Monument Lab quite succinctly and beautifully. We started off in 2012, co-founded by Paul Farber and Ken Lum as a series of classroom conversations, and it's since grown into this studio that collaborates with various stakeholders across the country and across the world. We produce exhibitions, we make publications, we foster or create public programs and redistribute resources among artists, activists, and other local organizers. What I'm going to do is just kind of explain briefly where we are coming from, what our intentions are as a studio, and what it is our sort of beliefs are. At Monument Lab, we define monuments as a statement of power and presence in public spaces. And furthermore, we also believe that there's no such thing as neutrality, right? That neutrality is a myth, that public spaces are always deeply political and kind of ripe for engagement and reinterpretation. Our values, as well as our methods of research and public engagement, are informed by ideas of liberation that emerge from the spaces of political activism. So in other words, social justice perspectives not only inform our shared values, but also our research methods for critically reading monuments, informing the processes of public art and space. And it's with these values and methods that we think about what to do with our inherited monument landscapes, but also envision how we might produce the next generation of monuments. So what I'm going to do is actually just go right to our field trip, which is featured in the exhibition, and you can download it. I think if you go to the Marked Monuments website, also to the Monument Lab website, you can find it and download it yourself. But this is a not a hand guide, a guidebook, a downloadable sort of project activity that allows or encourages people to engage with their surroundings in order to expand our collective imagination of what a monument can be. The exercises encourage people to actively familiarize themselves with their own communities, to reflect on their own histories, but also take agency over the production of historical narratives and collective memories. And here I want to sort of pick up on what Karen Olivier said, I think really so poignantly, about expanding who can be a keeper of democracy. And it's our intention that this activity encourages folks to partake in that process through these questions around public art and monuments. So it's sort of, you know, a historical and archaeological exercise, if you will, that also functions as a guide to energize civic engagement on the one hand, and speculative storytelling on the other, to decenter these singular heroic narratives that really undergird or prop up and fuel white patriarchal capital and white supremacy, to bring a focus to multiple experiences as well as multiple ways of knowing. And I'll stop here with just one last note that at Monument Lab, our projects and our engagements seek to sort of share authority, or even kind of collapse what that notion actually means, and to foreground participatory engagement as central to curatorial, artistic, municipal, sort of this official sanctioned work, rather than as sort of an afterthought or as extraneous. And I'm just going to stop there because I'd really love to hear from the other panelists. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Patricia. I appreciate that. I would also encourage you, I think Ashley's going to add the guide to the link to the field trip guide in the chat, but I would encourage you all to explore Monument Lab's website. It's a rich site with podcasts and bulletins and stories, and they have a little shop where you can buy cool t-shirts and their wonderful book from their project that they did in 2017. That's been a real asset for me. And so I just can't thank you enough for all the resources that Monument Lab provides for us. Okay, we're a little short on time, but so I'm going to jump to a question and try to leave some time for questions from the audience. So if people from the audience have questions, if you want to go ahead and start populating that, and we can try and get the conversation and allow the artists to dig a little deeper. I just wanted to kind of start with that many of the works in the exhibition look to the past and address the present and envision the future by challenging the historical legacies of oppression present in these spaces. Oh, and I guess, I'm sorry, if all the attendees want to turn, or the panelists want to turn on their cameras. Sorry about that, I should have said that. So how, I want to just have an informal conversation about how do you approach the persistence of memory and the sort of immense history and trauma embedded in these sites? And could you speak to a little deeper about your creative strategies to disrupt and transform and expand commemoration within these spaces within a contemporary context? Does anybody care to start?
I'll start. I knew when I was in Bentonville, I was fortunate to be included in a all-Black meeting where they were essentially telling me like what the deal is around Bentonville, because I had my own car. So I was like driving to go see my cousins, and I would pass by like a liquor store that would be called the Sundown Liquor Store. And for those who don't know, sundown essentially is what they would call towns that if you were there after sundown, you could be lynched or you could be killed mysteriously and they never find your body. So when I was doing this intervention, at first I felt really bold, and I was just gonna, not ask permission and just do it. But I think after that meeting and after really like realizing where I wanted to be more inconspicuous for my own safety. So, I mean, me performing in front of the Confederate statue, if you're there while it's being recorded, which there were people coming up, kids coming up, because it's a big balloon, a lot of people, you know, just thought it was like, okay, something artsy and weird. I don't know what it is. And I welcome that as my strategy, because I think it allows me to be safe. I just, I don't want to die for my art. I mean, kudos to John Sims for like going there and being in that space, because that's badass. I couldn't do it. I mean, but that's my level of honesty with myself. And I think that definitely um, has a weight on how I enter a space or how I navigate it or, you know, co-opt it for my use later on.
Thank you, Ariel. I know, Karen, you had kind of had some more digging that you were going to expand on into these ideas about invisibility and
Yeah, I mean, I live very close to Vernon Park, and now I just moved onto Astoria Street, named after
cool.
Astoria, which I love. And I was really, I knew it had to matter. Yes, it's Vernon Park. It's a couple blocks from where the White House was during the Revolutionary War. So it's a historic park, but I was very mindful of the fact that this neighborhood, Germantown, of course, the white flight, German settlers no longer here. It's predominantly Black neighborhood. There's a great deal of poverty. And I remember the day I was very aware of what can I make that could be, I wasn't in the historic touristic parks downtown where you'd have tourists coming. So I focused on, this has to be for people who live here. So that kind of changed my thinking. I say, okay, they pass by it every day when they're going across there to Mickey D's. So how could I make you keep seeing it anew? So the idea of like, and then I also wanted to deal with it. I was so frustrated that Francis Monument was in the corner of the park that should be, the monument that should be centrally located, that actually has real meaning, was in the far corner. So I was like, how could I like make these conversations happen? But this really started with initially me thinking about, I'm sorry, I'm long-winded, 16th century talking statues of Rome. I kind of always think about those, where there was these 8 statues where they became the spokesman for the people. People post notes on them. So you had this thing of different authors, different times happening, these conversations happen. So I'm always thinking about how do I make work that could be in conversation with other things, be it other objects. But when I started installing it that day, I had this guy come up to me. He was pissed. Like, it wasn't even a joke. He was pissed. He's like, how much did this cost? $25,000? I said, pretty close, 28. He's like, don't you realize people are starving right over there? I'm like, yes, because I live 2 blocks right over there. So I actually had to stop install. Like, I couldn't install. We sat down and talked for like 3 hours. And I was saying things like, I understand art is not going to solve poverty. It's not going to solve shelter, but what does it mean that we could see ourselves in our beauty? Why can't that be here? Why does it have to be in Society Hill or Rittenhouse Square? Why can't we have this space for us? So what does it mean to have this reflection back of you? And I think like we talked and there was something in realizing that I'm not claiming that this is going to do something, but what does it mean to, first of all, have an object that's always never sitting still? And I always think about monuments as this perpetual resolution. I mean, that comes from James Young. Like, what does it mean for it to not be resolved? What does it mean for it to be porous? What does it mean for it to always be shifting? You're shifting and you're expanding every day the way this monument and its reflection is expanding and shifting. So in the end, I mean, he was like the number one guy. He's like, that's Karen, she made that work. I mean, I had someone else say to me, they must know we're still here if they let this piece be built, because they know there's money. And this could lead to some sort of agency. This could lead to kind of actually money being fueled into Germantown, which is actually now happening. So no, it wasn't directly affecting, but what it affected people emotionally. I mean, it never got graffitied and people thought it was going to be destroyed. They're like, it's a poor neighborhood. They don't care it's going to be graffitied. The only thing that ever was on there was a sticker of a smiley face. So it was this way of people realize they talking about, you know, you make work that's political and you hope it actually means something, but they became the keepers and protectors of it. And they saw and said that we have this value. Like, yes, this is ours. Like, it wasn't mine. It was like, it was theirs. So, yeah.
That's beautiful. I think Tripeta I may have read this, or maybe she mentioned it to me, that one of the women actually came and polished it, and weekly or daily or something, and that's just beautiful. I want to, maybe we can, Jory or John, do you have anything to add to that? I might just address a couple of the questions that we have in our Q&A before we run out of time. Allegra
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd like to respond. First of all, let me thank you for that very meaty, hyper-dimensional question. And, don't even know where to dive in on that. But you can hear me, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay,
so in terms of strategies of engagement, with my particular work, the conversation is multifocal. It's always been. One is my conversation is with the history of human culture, right? I'm sort of having a conversation with the past, with the history, looking forward. I'm also having a conversation with hosting institutions, also who are creating some level of support, and also conversations with the pushbackers and the haters, right? We're having those levels of support, and then we also are having a conversation with timing, because a project that I do today or did 10 years ago may resonate very, very differently based on the political timing, even though the content can be very, very similar. And so if I had had my Gettysburg show today versus in 2007, it would have been a very, very, very different response. I mean, the other thing I like to point attention to is, particularly with this kind of 4-dimensional vice thing, because the pressure is coming in all these different directions, is that when you're working with institutions who initially claim to support and want to help address issues of social justice and get behind various projects, but they're also in this very complicated position of serving the needs and legacies of board members and faculties and all kinds of other lobbying groups that happen on the side. Then you also have the issues around pushing really critical social justice issues. So that also creates a very vice system. And so the question is, how does the artist navigate through these spaces where they need support to push the work, right? They need to kind of have a strategy not to get killed, right? And then how do you challenge both hosting institutions and the doubters and pushbackers and the haters who? So that means if I'm working with the Gettysburg, the hosting folks who brought me there versus the Sons of Daughters of the Confederacy, or dealing with the Ku Klux Klan. And very often with my work, I've felt pressure on all sides. So I think the key is, for me, is how to create a level of independence and not to be afraid to push everybody, because some of these issues requires pushing everybody, and sometimes all at the same time. The other thing I want to say really quickly, what I've learned with this work, in 2007, when I brought the show to Gettysburg, I was under the romantic illusion that art could help make big changes, right? And what I'm realizing is that art can help create a discussion and create inspiration. But what I'm finding, unfortunately, which is probably the limits of our contemporary human consciousness, is that it usually takes death to move the discussion. In 2015, when we started, there was a whole issue around the Confederate flag, right, in South Carolina. It was because 9 people got shot in a church. 9 people, 9 Black people got shot in the church. Now we're talking about Confederate iconography and pushback on monuments, well, in a big way. Why is that? Because George Floyd got snuffed out, and we saw that visually in real time in some ways. So this idea that death inspires in a different kind of way than art. And my hope is that as we become a more enlightened society, a more conscious society, art can be more inspirational in ways to move very complicated discussions in lieu of death. And so So the work of the artists, the work of creative forces is still very much needed. It's so much more work to do. One thing I do want to mention in terms of some of the strategies is that with this Gamble plantation and my petition, I've reached out to politicians. And I reached out to Tommy Gregory. We brought him down to the Ringling Museum, and we screened my Freedom Memorial animation. This is a Republican politician, and he was moved by this presentation. And now he's working, I believe, working on a bill to rid the Florida law books of Confederate statutes dealing with holidays and also pro-Confederate language. And so here we see that the art, public spaces, non-public spaces can create inspiration and emotional changes in individuals, particularly individuals who are in positions of power, to move the discussion forward in ways that needs to be moved. And so I think that's been one of the good things. But at the same time, I think it's very important for us to work together, because, you know, I've been working in isolation for a very long time, but the work becomes very important and massively on target when it's a group process. And now we're seeing that happen. The question is, can that happen without critical loss, death, and being inspired in that kind of way? So my hope is that these are some opportunities is to push these ideas, and that institutions, liberal institutions that support these kind of work, do it not because of massive social pressure, but they do it because of the virtue of the ideas and the real fidelity towards social justice, and have the courage to stand up when no one else is standing up at the moment. Because by the time everybody else is standing up, people have died, people have like reacting. And so I think this is a great opportunity to fortify some of this kind of commitment to pushing social justice issues on an institutional level, to the board level, to the administrative level, to support this when it's not easy and status quo and everybody's talking about it in the press. So that's my two cents.
Thanks. That's great. I think Ariel has something to respond.
Yeah, John, you got me hyped. I really appreciate that. And Karen, I really appreciate your work. I feel like what I love about both of your works in the same space is that there is a language of care in Karen's work, and there is a language of, you know, understanding our boundaries, our limitations, and what we have to surpass in order to actually enact some kind of change and realize where that change is coming from and where it's not coming from. And I like to think that every time I think about a project where I'm talking to Black or Brown communities, that I think about care first. And I think about, okay, a lot of these issues that are occurring are happening to us. And so how do we combat that with a level of care that still engages that conversation? And so, like, for me, I'm so focused now moving forward in developing an archive, and to really just, like, you know, continue developing our unique development of language in order to describe these increasingly difficult feelings that are a combination of, you know, this is my land, but also this is a land that is inhabited by people who don't want to see me alive. And, you know, that confliction I wrestle with all the time. But I think at the front of it is like, how do I protect my people? So, like, for instance, you hear the voices of all four women, but you don't see their faces, because I'm thinking about, like, you know, I'm very careful about the exploitative qualities of video and it being shared again and again and again. I mean, we've seen it, like, you know, like John said, it takes for oppressors to see Black people, you know, dying, protecting their family in order to have sympathy. And I'm like, how can we, all right, I'm not gonna continue to give that, even though apparently that's what's needed, but I really wanna make this work for my people. So you know what to expect when you go to Bentonville. Like, you know what they're saying. It's not necessarily me, but it's also like, I'm part of it. These women were looking out for me. And that is that's the emotion that goes into my editing. It's like, what did they say to let me know we love you, we want to see you protected, and also this shit needs to come down. So I just wanted to say that because both of y'all got me real hyped. So
I appreciate that.
There's a couple of really great questions from attendees, and this might be a good one perhaps for Patricia to address. Maria writes, how do the less creative, more logistical processes and structures, commission, host institutions affect the visibility of monuments? And how can we build greater equity into these dynamics?
I actually think that this is another way of asking what you asked, Sarah, with regard to kind of which narratives are highlighted in our public imagination and in our public spaces. I think the problem with institutions, and full disclosure, I am part of an institution. Like, I'm at NYU, right? That is as institutional as we can get. And so I understand this. And I think the problem is it's multidimensional. There are multiple sort of temporalities. There are multiple kind of issues here. I think let me say it another way. I think with whatever site you're engaging or activating, or whatever public space you're engaging, there are multiple narratives. I think we know that. I think that's been established both by academics, but also by artists and activists. We all can, I think, agree on this. But I think most of the time, especially within our canons of art history, as well as in terms of what sort of state sanctioned or municipally state sanctioned monuments, is that one narrative really gets highlighted, right? And so I think it's this sort of like, depending on honestly who has the political power and authority, who has the resources, that one narrative, dominant narrative, is codified and retold as if canon, as if law, as if sort of immutable and unchangeable. And so that's why I think a lot of the artists on this panel use occlusion as a really interesting sort of aesthetic or political strategy to sort of like bring out the fact that this is actually what's happening underneath. And so that's like just a really long kind of maybe rambly way of saying that I think what institutions can do is honestly to just hire more people that are historically marginalized, whose perspectives are occluded, whose perspectives are made invisible or have been made invisible. And I can say that not only as someone who is in this space and orbit of Monument Lab, but also as a researcher and teacher, right, in the Ivory Tower, where I oftentimes, when people say, okay, you have to teach an intro class to Western art history, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And I know that this is being recorded, so. But oftentimes the sort of stories that I am supposed to teach my students really, I mean, honestly, seriously, continue to prop up these stories of kind of heroic whiteness that somehow have like a straight trajectory down from the deep past, from deep antiquity. And so I'll stop there. I don't know if that's a satisfying answer. It's a it's not a direct answer, but I really think that that's honestly just hire more people of color, like hire queer people. Genuinely, I think that is the simplest way of moving this forward, is by redistributing the resources and sharing authority.
I want to say something to that, and I apologize for the noise outside. I have not been able to control my environment today, but yeah, to continue on what Patricia was saying, that's exactly that lines up with my experience too in the process of asking for these permits and working through these proposals. It's like the people who are in positions of leadership to approve or disapprove of these proposals tend to align with the history that these monuments are preserving, basically. And it's been interesting to see that in maybe places that have more diversity, or that have not necessarily diversity of like representation, but diversity of thought, maybe, is where these proposals have advanced. Because, for example, in my most recent experience in the Dominican Republic, it's a very diverse country, but the national narrative is so embracing of this colonial figure that, and that has to do with like education, and how that has been basically crafted by, again, people in positions of power who had the power to determine what valid history was and which histories were not valid to highlight. So it's been interesting to see the different cases and the different responses, but it really all goes back to who is in a position to agree with this questioning.
Yeah. And that sort of brings us to this another question from a panelist that asked about specifically Jory's. They're asking if there's a difference in the reception of your work in the U.S. and the Dominican Republic.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's interesting. I mean, there's support and denial and disagreement in both places, and they're manifested in different ways and different degrees, and maybe even different. I don't know. I think it also has to do with the platforms where this was. Where the information about these proposals and these actions, this public art installations, temporary installations, were disseminated. Because, for example, in the US is the one in Miami, where it didn't have to do with Art Basel, but it was there during Art Basel. So people perceived it as something like more art in a way. In a way, it also definitely brought up interesting conversations, especially I think when I was there installing, because that particular one didn't have much of an outlet for me to hear people's opinions on it. We did have like hashtags and we try to promote it, try to find a way to have that engagement. But I think from all the installations, it's the one that has the least maybe documentation of that engagement. But while I was installing, there was definitely interesting conversation. Especially there was one Black man who worked for a tour bus that parked their buses right in front of the statue of Christopher Columbus because it's in a parking lot. And he was very engaged in this conversation, and he kept coming back every day while we were installing. He almost became a friend, and he was very vocal to everyone passing by. He was almost like my PR person. He was very excited about the statue, and that was really, really great to see. But like my access to that was based on me being there installing. Also, people who passed by were in objection to it, and they made it be known. One of the two statues, the one for Ponce de Leon, the fabric that I put on it was stolen on like the third day. And I had to go back to New York, sew it again, send it back, and have people install it again. And in that occasion, the label, we printed these labels and put it on the monument, were also smashed. So I think it was like a very specific action in being opposed to that installation. Recently in the Dominican Republic, I think like I'm still processing the conversation, but I've been really moved and excited about people who have been having these conversations about, yes, why do we have this here? Why is this indigenous chief figure in this position underneath Columbus? And who makes these decisions? Why is this here? And yes, it's in the colonial zone, but it was installed a century and a half ago. It's not 500 years old. So there's also a correlation because it's in the colonial zone. A lot of people thought it was, equal to all of this older architecture in age. So something interesting about this was not only how it was widely shared in like a very democratic spaces like newspapers and social media platforms like Twitter and Instagram of basically news outlet that are more contemporary and that are like younger people look at them, but they're ultimately news outlets. And the way that we thought about it, and we made like this carousel post on Instagram using like the 10 slides space to explain different points. And it was really interesting to, again, see how people didn't know the history of the statue. They didn't know it was there since the 1877. They didn't know that Anacaona is the figure that is underneath the statue, because even at the level of design, she's decorative at the level of design. There's this base, everything under the base gets like kind of blurred and you just see the statue above the base. So everything is very intentional. And we were breaking that down, and it was really interesting to see people, learning these things for the first time. At the same time, there's also like a big, I wouldn't say big, but they're just very loud and vocal. There's like this new Dominican pride patriotism movement that links the figure of Christopher Columbus with, for example, Juan Pablo Duarte, who is a main character of our independence. And I say independence on quotes because, yes, it was our independence, but the independence that the Dominican Republic celebrates is the 1844 one, which is our independence from Haiti, even though we had a Spain take over again after that, and there was another independence in 1865. So even that history and how that is promoted as like the story of the nation and linked to patriotism is obviously, there's intentions behind that. And going back to Columbus, people link, not people, but well, yes, people in the Dominican Republic in general kind of vaguely link him to all of these other prominent figures in history, but specifically people who are these patriots, which they even line up with like white supremacy in the States. They have the I think Gadsden flag on their profile. They have all of these appropriated signs and symbols from US supremacy, white supremacy, that I was really puzzled by. So they were very active at like sending hate messages to me personally, or on my post, or in all of the news outlets, because they were specifically linking this action to pro-Haitianism, which is anti-Dominican in their minds. They were linking this to, they were calling me a feminazi or Afro-feminazi. So it's just interesting to see like how they were calling me like revisionist, even when revisionism is a term that is applied to their views on history. So it's interesting how they also like co-opt language and activate it in these ways. So yeah, for sure. Like, but again, like all of this is linked to the outlet of disseminating the information about the statues being wrapped. I think the one in the US just happened to have circulated more in an arts an artistic space versus this one, which is like in public space, both physically but also like circulated in platforms of public discourse.
Thank you. I really need to be respectful of everyone's time. We've gone almost 20 minutes over, and I know we didn't get to all the questions, but I just want to thank you all so much for participating and for all the attendees. And I hope that this has been informative. I do want to mention that the next symposium in this series is scheduled for Saturday, January 30th at 2 p.m. And it's the response challenging the state-sponsored protection of Confederate monuments, iconography, and heritage in Florida. So this will, conversations can continue regarding these issues. And thank you all so much for participating and joining us this morning. I wish we had more time. And thank you again.
This is great.
Y'all take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.